Eric Raymond, open source's very own pugnacious polemicist, portrayed the Linux kernel as a kind of exemplary project that open source developers would do well to learn from. Notice that I refer to it as the Linux kernel. A kernel is the core of an operating system. It manages the system's resources and provides an interface to the hardware for your programs. Strictly speaking, Linux is a kernel. This is an important point because so often these days the name Linux refers to the whole operating system. By the end of this video you'll see that's not totally accurate. Simply by itself, a kernel is not terribly useful. So why then did the authors bother to develop it? And why does it deserve to be so celebrated? Well, let's step into history and travel to a faraway magical land. Finland. Once upon a time in Helsinki there was a university student. We'll call him Linus Torvalds, because that's his name. He was on a computer science course and he used a version of the Unix operating system called Minix. Minix was intended only as a teaching tool, and Torvalds soon grew tired of its limitations. So he did the kind of thing that, gosh darn it, makes you proud to be a programmer. He decided to just create his own Unix clone. Critically, he didn't have to replace the entire system. Like Unix, Minix was highly modular. The kernel was just another program that could be swapped for another. The other pre-existing programs, like the compiler and the command line interpreter, could be reused with Linus's new kernel after a bit of tweaking. Very soon, Linux and the programs built around it grew and grew. Tens of thousands of lines of code. Hundreds of thousands, even millions of lines of code after a while. Now it's feasible for one person to be able to produce a kernel maybe, but a whole operating system with a variety of applications and utilities? So what happened between Linux's birth and its eventual success? Well, the key was, if you'll pardon the phrase, Linus Torvalds' promiscuity. Soon after producing a working version, Linus made his kernel freely available on the internet. It was seen by a handful of hackers who got involved and contributed some code of their own. From there, the word spread, and in a snowball effect, more people got involved, and then more, and even more. Writing code, reporting and fixing bugs, requesting new features. Linus was soon getting contributions from other programmers all over the world. Not only that, but thanks to that modularity of which we spoke earlier, it was quickly made apparent that there was a certain collection of free software already in existence that the Linux kernel could simply slot beside to produce a working operating system, and thereby saving a huge amount of effort. Let me explain. Yes, it's that beard again. In 1984, Richard Stallman and others began to produce GNU, a Unix-like operating system made entirely from free software. By the early 1990s, most of the essential system utilities and programs were ready, but Stallman's gang had run into serious technical difficulties getting their kernel to work. So on one side you had a gang with programs but no kernel, and on the other you had the Linux gang with a kernel but no programs. So the Linux community made their kernel work with the existing GNU software, and so ended up with a working operating system. This resulting operating system, that was initially a fusion of GNU and Linux, has come to be called just Linux. A few insist on calling it GNU Linux, but this has never found more than minority acceptance. After all, it is now so much more than just GNU and Linux. Thousands upon thousands of other programs have now been written to work with the operating system. So much so, it might be a daunting prospect to attempt to get hold of a working version of Linux and all the programs that you want. But thank heaven for distros. Distros, or more precisely Linux distributions, are projects that package together the Linux kernel, the GNU programs and a cornucopia of other applications. Most of them provide access to a very clever infrastructure that allows you to browse through a continuously maintained repository of thousands of ready packaged free software programs and install them onto your machine with just the click of a mouse button. The distros come in a wealth of different forms. There are user-friendly distros for the newbies, power distros for the ultra-nerds, even live distros that come on CDs or pen drives and allow you to run Linux without installing it onto your hard drive. Furthermore, Linux is finding its way into the corporate sector, running on a large proportion of internet servers and powering supercomputers. But I'd better stop before I begin to sound like an evangelist, because that's not what I'm here for. Once again, the moral of the story comes down to the fact that Linux's success is dependent upon its open source nature. Technically, it's not highly remarkable, it's just another Unix. But because Linus Torvalds decided to make the source freely available to all under the GNU General Public License, Linux pervaded to become the success it is today. If he had guarded the source code and denied others the right to share and modify it, I very much doubt you'd ever have heard of Linux at all.